Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome everyone, hope you've been having a good day. Today's a big one because it's the start of the beta. So right before we get into it, I wanted to give you guys some of my first impressions and a review of the stream that occurred at the end of last week, in which the devs showed off the last 3 elite specializations. Wow, that was a mouthful. So I'm going to go through all the biggest details that I picked up from the day, the stuff I'm excited about and that I'll be testing in the upcoming beta. Now obviously when their stream went on, me and Boots did a show at the same time, so if you saw that live there might be some overlap here, but this is kind of what I've chewed on over the past couple of days. Footage in the background, obviously then, that you're watching is from ArenaNet's stream. I'm sorry, but the quality is only 720p. I don't know why, but the past month, all my YouTube downloader services have just shat the bed and refused to go full quality now. If anyone has any advice about that, let me know. So this is obviously a really long stream ArenaNet did. It's technically available in 1080-60, but I can't get it easily. Not unless I sit there and manually record my screen of it, which still wouldn't be that good and would basically be a waste of 2 hours. So anyway, let's run through. My mindset, as always, as I go in for these 3 specs, is mostly, first and foremost, for open worlds and story completion exploration. What I'm thinking about is general, normal Guild Wars 2 gameplay for the vast majority of us, where they are focused, and what we'll be doing when the X-Pack comes out. You're going to go to Cantha, what are you going to do? You're going to explore the maps, you're going to beat the story, you're going to play the meta events, it's going to be all that kind of stuff. So that's mostly what I'm thinking about here, how these things will feel to play in those environments. And we can talk about the other stuff. I'm always still thinking about PvP, even though I haven't played any of the recent seasons. We can talk about World vs. World, especially when we see the Fruits of the Alliance stuff. And I'll be thinking more about strikes and 10-man stuff, like the hardcore endgame, when we actually see those strikes are on the horizon coming out. But, you know, they're post-release. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of. And I think that's applicable to, what, 99% of people watching this video? So let's see what we've got. First of all, I want to do the Mechanist. The Mechanist really stole the show. It was fantastic to watch. I think before even they did this stream, you could kind of tell from the trailer and the little snippets of information from the Maths of the article that this thing had a lot of quality and a lot of budget and time spent on it. And you can really feel it. It's fantastic to watch. So the idea is you obviously get 9 traits to pick from, plus a couple of, you know, always passives. Every single one of those traits customizes one of 3 F skills, as well as giving its own passive. So basically, the first rung of traits you pick, that's going to change the F1. The second rung of traits that you can pick, the Master traits, they change the F2. The Grandmaster traits change the F3. And so you've got kind of 3 by 3. You've got quite a big matrix of different ways that you can run the mech. And I couldn't quite see this at the time, but each trait kind of physically changes the golem too. So it really is like you're customizing it and there's a selection to pick from. Really, the whole profession is about that fantasy that Rangers have, where you have this AI companion with you. Rangers get to pick from a variety of different animals. Mechanists will be getting their variety through customization, and it works super well. It's like one of those things that you could kind of feel they could do with the trait system for a while now, and now they've dedicated a whole specialization to that kind of interaction. After all of that, you can customize it further, I guess, with the signet skills, which the signet for the engineer, first of all, look really cool. They look like the standard sort of signets, but they're all metallic and steel, which I quite enjoy. But the idea is that if you have the mech alive with you, the mech will do the ability. If the mech is gone or defeated for a while, you will do it. So you kind of have this duality to them, just as you have with the other signets, you know, where you're trading off a passive in order to use an active for a while. And the abilities themselves look fairly inspired. The heal makes the mech produce a big safety dome, like a bubble, a bit like, you know, as an engineer, you place a turret and you'd get the mini bubbles on them. But this will spam barrier to any allies who huddle under it. So I really like the idea. I find it easy to imagine the idea of, like, I'm fighting a boss or something, I pop the heal and now actually hide under the mech. So there's a little bit more movement, a little bit more of the environment that I'm thinking about as I play it. There's a shadow step signet, which not only can shadow step the mech, but shadow steps the engineer as well. I'll tell you what, guys, it really feels like with this batch of elite specs, they said, okay, if you don't have a shadow step yet, you're getting one. And if you don't have quickness or alacrity or any of these like boon tools yet, you're getting them. They really just want to flesh out the whole roster right here, right now. So yeah, there are kind of 2 shadow steps here. They've got a damaging field one, as you kind of expect. The elite is a bit like Prime Light Beam from Hollow again, except it's got this cool interaction where if your mech is broken, because the mech will be the thing doing the beam, but if it's broken, instead of the beam coming out of the engineer, it will resummon the mech. So this is like another way of bringing your mech back instead of just your final F ability, which I think is going to be an interesting bypass. And as I'll talk more about in a second, I think this spec is going to feel really bad to play when that mech's dead. So that I expect a lot of people will be on that elite. Hopefully it doesn't feel just like a recolored Virtuoso laser beam, but that extra mechanic definitely adds a lot to it. I am kind of curious about this thing where the skills trigger on you if the mech's gone. I really hope we don't end up in a weird place where it feels better to not have your companion with you because you have more control. Like, you can trust when you use the ability better. You can trust that you're aiming it better than the AI is, so you kind of want it gone. That would feel very, very clunky and wouldn't be great. It does feel like ArenaNet's designed for that because when the mech triggers the skills, they're all way more powerful. But here's the thing, and I alluded to it just a second ago. Let's really dive into this idea of just how bad the Mechanist is going to feel without its AI companion. Because I think the devs have made something really special and weird with this spec that goes a lot further than Ranger, say. Ranger can continue to feel like a full class and have like fun experiences even when its pet's dead, let alone the fact it can pet swap to bring another one out, right? Or pet swap to stop it dying in the first place. This spec's gonna feel really bad without one. Now, why is that? It's something that I talked about a lot on the actual day of the stream, and that's the fact that these new F abilities actually replace your tool belt skills. So I was talking before all this came out that it might be cool if this elite spec enhances them, or what if on this elite spec we get our core F5 ability back so we can mini-mower and we can orbital command and stuff, which currently is disabled on engineer elite specialization options. No, you don't get any of that. You don't get any standard tool belt skills at all. They're replaced entirely with the mech ones. So, Engineer is already a class that doesn't really have that many buttons to swap. It doesn't get weapon swap. And the compensation for weapon swap, well, is these F skills, which now you're getting less of them and in theory on longer cooldowns at the time, and you're relying on the AI to execute them. Not only that, but the signets are great. So one of the other things that Engineer kind of has to compensate to make it feel very swappy and have a lot of button press are kits. But you're not going to be getting tool belt kit skills, and you might be disincentivized to run kits in the first place just because the signets are so good. Then just look at the fundamental here. We're dedicating a whole line to opt into this experience. So we only kind of get 2 complementary lines. Let's compare that to Ranger, who gets weapon swap, who gets pet swap, who gets their profession abilities and can dedicate their elite spec slot to another whole bunch of mechanics like, you know, Celestial Avatar. So when we look at the Mechanist, I'm not saying this is bad, but what I'm saying is the Mechanist's mech is such a huge proportion of everything you can do that the mech has to be like a god. Now, I'm really excited about that experience, especially from a PvE perspective. I want the mech to feel like a god, and I actually really kind of like the idea of these playstyles where you're doing a little bit less and you're a little bit slower with your button pressing. I think it's actually important and healthy for the game to have that playstyle, and a lot of people who look for those experiences are on Engineer because they kind of think they might get that with turrets at some point. You know, maybe this is a little controversial, but back in the day, I used to like those old Phantasm Mesmer builds that you could take into a raid, where you just get 3 Phantasms up, and then your actual gameplay was really basic and really simple. And what that let you do was learn the actual encounter and learn all the other animations and stuff instead of getting bogged down in all skill rotations. I think it's healthy for the game to have stuff like this. So the idea that there's the Mechanist and I can go to new people with End of Dragon and say, play this, the mech will just blow things up for you and you're going to be doing something quite simple with a couple of utility skills, a few signets and like some mace skills, and that's it. I actually think that's really good. But they are walking a fine line, especially when you come to the other game modes where, like, if you were to take this into PvP, it's pretty trivial to kite a pet, you know, just climb up a kite spot, climb back down. They don't know how to jump, so they have to run, you know, massive stretches of time and move around. It's pretty trivial, and so now you can do this with the Mechanist too. I'm curious how it will feel there, and I'm curious likewise how it will feel in World vs. World, and whether, when we get to the 10-man stuff later, it's going to start annoying people if there's, say, a high DPS build that you don't even really need much mechanical execution for. Again, I think that's fine, but it always tends to rile people up when those kinds of builds exist, and ArenaNet have classically nerfed them. So at that point, you know, maybe they have to lean into the quality of life sides of the mech, it giving people barrier and it being good at breaking break bars and so on and stuff like that. For PvP, it does remind me a bit of when the Renegade came out in Path of Fire, where all of the spirits could be blinded and CC'd and they despawn and it would ruin their animations and stuff. You don't want the mech to be in the same position. Now, they did something fun. In PvE, you get a break bar on the mech. That's awesome, but it's not in the other environments. Maybe they'll look into doing it there again later, but they said they thought that sounded a bit OP. So we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to stop myself there. I've been talking about the Mechanist way too long. I'm really interested in it. Curious to see how it feels in the betas, which, you know, like, setup of F1, F2, F3 feels the best, which signets are the most fun. I'll mention as well, one of the Grandmaster traits that I really want to get my hands on is this cool thing where while the mech is dead, it will give you air support orbital bombardments. Now, if that's a lot like the Mortar Kit's F5 ability, that could be super fun. They actually demoed some interesting trait interactions where you can put explosions on it and combo it with the explosions line. The thing looks like it's made for the tools line, by the way, because the F abilities from the mech trigger on tools traits. So like static discharges, whenever you use a tool belt skill, a little lightning bolt comes out of you, the engineer. Now, on a Mechanist, I was really happy to see they coded it this way. The static discharge comes out of the mech when you use the mech abilities. Now, that's just brilliant, don't you guys think? So there you have it. I was really impressed with all the support in UI, being able to name it just like Rangers can. Real show winner, and I'm happy to talk about that first here. Next, let's get on with the Untamed. Now, I'm not afraid to say that the Untamed was the least captivating to me from the day. And it's not that it's all doom and gloom. There were a lot of things to love here. First of all the lore segments that they did, the Untamed, and I'm talking about all 9 specs now, this was one of the most interesting lore segments. They actually talked about Ergos, and they talked about the corruption and the Wardens. So, you remember all that speculation we did about the Untamed before any of the reveals that it might be called the Warden, or it might have something to do with the Juggernauts, and then we just kind of got this crappy name, Untamed, that was like super generic. Well, you know, we kind of were on point with it. It sort of is all the lore and all the fascinating things we want it to be. It's just it doesn't have the snappy name to go with it. So very keen to see what they do when the X-Pack actually comes out. Those lore segments are fine, but they play it so close to the chest, I guess because they've only got a limited amount of story they can really tell, that you don't really get any big details. We'll have to wait until End of Dragons is actually out. Now, if I have any other problem with the name Untamed, except for the fact it's just generic, it's actually that it's kind of just the wrong name for this spec now that we've seen its mechanics. Because, if anything, we have tamed our pet further. We have greater control of our pet, and we understand it more now. So, this definitely is like a Beast Mastery Plus feeling line, because what they've done is exposed on the F abilities all of the pet buttons now. Now, I'm not sure if this is coming to all Ranger specs. I think it is just an Untamed thing. But you know how normally you would press F1 just to direct the pet to go attack something? Well, now when you press F1, I assume it has that same behavior, but also you can control that final pet skill. They always had like something they would decide to do for themselves. And honestly, guys, you know, speaking as someone who's followed this franchise since its birth, this game since its birth, I remember before Guild Wars 2 came out, the devs talking about this duality where the Ranger could control like one ability, but the pet would control the other because the pet has its own personality, it's its own thing, it's like the symbiotic thing. They didn't want to give you complete control. That's not what they believed in. Now, here we come with the Untamed, and you do get that complete control. And what that practically means, I don't know whether you really believe in their original vision, but what that practically means now is hopefully some of the other pets in the game are more interesting to use. Like, I remember doing a video about this earlier in the year. There are some massive heals available, but the thing is, like, unless you can control when a heal is being used, it's really not that strong. But once you can, it might be worth something. That's something I'll be focusing a lot on the betas, just running through which pets have what and whether there's anything more fun that we can do. I'm also curious to see how various traits work. Like, can I proc Beast Mastery traits with the F1 stuff now as well as just F2? So can I like be double taunting now? I appreciate there's going to be some ICDs and stuff, but if that's true, they could really lean into that design in some fun ways. So probably most of the discussion I've had about the Untamed involves like their unique mechanics. So they have a mechanic a bit like the Vindicator, where if you guys remember on the Vindicator, your new special button really mostly just interacted with the new special legend. So when you're playing Vindicator, really it's gonna feel best to have the St. Victor and Arkamora's legend on. If you're not using the legend as well, the F skill feels just like kind of weird and limp. Same here on the Untamed, except instead of it being the right-hand side of your skill bar with the utilities, it's the weapon. So they have this Unleash mode, and Unleash mode has 5 new skills for you to use, but you can't do them at any point. They have to be on a hammer. It's like hammer got 10 weapon skills instead of 5. It's not like CA when you're a druid and it will go over whatever you want. It's only on hammer, and there's like a duality as well where they share cooldowns, so you're locked in. Now, Boots disliked that being locked in very greatly. I'm not sure I mind that much. See, for me, as more elite specs come into the game, I feel more and more like if I'm playing an elite spec, I kind of want to opt into the full fantasy of that elite spec and use their weapons, which tend to be slightly overtuned anyway. So my assumption was that if I'm playing an Untamed, I'll have a hammer. If I'm not using a hammer, maybe I want to be a soul beast, you know? Maybe I want to be a druid. Maybe I want to be a core ranger. Maybe it doesn't matter at that point. And the more elite specs that add, the stronger I'm going to end up feeling that way. And, you know, we have weapon swap too. It's not like you're locked into just hammer. You can always then swap to your axe, warhorn, or whatever else you want to use, your longbow, your shortbow, and so on. So it's not like all customization's gone. I don't think it's a very big deal, but it did feel a bit off with the Vindicator, I have to admit, and so maybe it'll feel a bit off here too. I guess we'll have to see. So the other thing you can do is unleash your pet. So unleashing your pet also gives new skills, and they're going to be 3 buttons here. On the original day, I didn't think very much of these, but I actually think they're really well designed now. Okay, so what's one thing you might have liked to do a lot of times in Guild Wars, but never really lived the fantasy of? Maybe you wanted to have a Condi pet style? Like the Condi is, like the pet is doing big damage, but they're doing it via Condi. You're very limited on options with that. Like you could go Reef Drake to spam some confusion, or maybe you can try and get some poison in certain place, but it doesn't feel that good. Well, here, one of the unleash abilities means your pet will be poisoning, and hopefully it unlocks that fantasy. They have Boon Rip. One of the abilities is Boon Rip, and the other one is projectile mitigation. It's a bit like what we talked about with the mech before. The pet will get a bubble around them that follows them as they move. So you're going to have these fun experiences where you're like hiding behind your pet who's actually like guarding you. You know, imagine like that basic interaction of an actual guardian walking around in your party, and he uses his shield 5 and you stand behind him and he defends you. It's a badass thought, isn't it? But it's so rare we actually have it in the game. Well, I honestly think as an Untamed, as you're traveling around the world, the opportunity for that to come up is very high, and you'll be able to live it like regularly. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that Cantha is filled with projectile firing stuff. So we could do this with our mech, and the Untamed can do that with their pet as well, or whatever other, you know, buildcraft already exists in the game. I generally feel like the game could do a little bit more with projectile stuff. And finally, if that's not enough, there is a shadow step on the pet unleash here too. Like I said, shadow steps for everyone on this wave, and I think that this is kind of amazing as well. Like shadow stepping the high burst damage pets like a gazelle or a bird to like one-shot something, or really slam in quick while you stand back with like a bow, and you can be sure the enemy's gonna target the pet because the pet can get in there so fast. I think that's all really fun. You know, maybe even teleporting something so you can snap down a break bar or CC like a player in the competitive environments. It might be really obnoxious over there for what it's worth. I mean, Path of Fire gazelle nonsense was bad enough, let alone now while one's teleporting around. It's kind of a sign to me I'm absolutely not interested in that area of the game at all for this era, but we'll see. So at first I wasn't too keen on the pet unleash stuff. I kind of wanted it to be specific to the pets themselves, you know. Soul Beast added like categories of pets, you know, is it a versatile pet, is it a ferocious pet, and so on. And I liked the idea that maybe depending on that classification, the unleashes you get could change, you know, and they could do a bunch of different skills. They didn't do that. It's the same 3 all over the place, but I think they're widely applicable and might open up some new stuff. The main thing I want to combo all of this with, I want to play a Beastmaster Untamed with a Flame Wyvern. The Flame Wyvern from Hearthorns is like my favorite pet. It's got such a cool F2 with the giant fly in the air and the spreading flame field and stuff. Maybe I can now do fun things with it? I don't know though. I don't think that this really adds anything just there yet. If I use the Poison Cloud while my Wyvern is flying around in the sky, will there be like projectile mitigation zooming around all over the place in like a bubble? What's that going to look like? That's going to be curious. We'll test that too. One final cool thing about the Untamed is the heal skill, which is super strong. It's like the AED from Engineer, you know? It puts you into a state where if you take fatal damage, you get a massive heal. So the idea is you've got to like try and take as much damage as possible while it's up so you heal. It's like AED, but it saps health from your pet. So there's a really fun idea of like counterplaying. You see it goes up, so you start hitting the pet instead. I don't know whether we'll really see that interaction come up in PvE too much, but maybe. There's not much really else to say. The utility skills with cantrips, none of them really leapt off the page for me. The playstyle of running around on a hammer and the flipping of the hammer skills didn't really jump off the page to me, and I think that's why I was a bit disappointed. At the end of the day, Ranger, I've already had that kind of melee grinder experience for many years. You know, Greatsword 5 into a Greatsword 2, or Axe 4 into whatever else you want to do, Axe 5 and so on. So it comes down to the pet interactions for me. Fingers crossed. Speaking of which, there are 4 new pets. They didn't really reveal anything about them, not their buttons or anything. They didn't demo them. They're not even going to be in the beta, unfortunately, but the pets are confirmed. Phoenix is one of them. I was sad to see there's no crab. I used to love the red and the blue crab from original factions. They've gone with the baby turtle instead. And that's a bit weird to me, because I'm like, everyone's going to get the baby turtle as they actually get their siege turtle mount. That's not just a ranger thing. But as a ranger, you'll be able to actually use it too. Maybe it will be tied together, you know. As you're building your siege turtle, it will give you a baby that you, if you're a ranger, you can continue to fight with. That's a fun thought. That leaves us, guys, with the Spectre. Oh boy, the Spectre. Now, I've saved the best for last here. The Spectre was definitely my favorite looking of this set. Again, these are just first impressions today. But oh man, now what is the main thing I loved about it? Well, this is where we see a real rule break. Remember they said we're going to break some rules at the start? I see one real new fundamental thing that's happened with Guild Wars 1, and it's here, 9 out of 9 on the Spectre, and it's direct targeted healing. So far in Guild Wars, to try and avoid the whole playing the user interface whack-a-mole experience that you get in most MMOs, where you're just looking at health bars and when they get low, you click and then you use a heal skill. To try and avoid that and keep players focused on the environment and the dynamics of the combat itself, ArenaNet deliberately opted to never add direct targeted healing to this game. They want you to splash healing AoEs and projectiles at each other. So when you look at like an Elementalist in Water Attunement with the Water Trident, the skill 3, you're supposed to like ground target and throw it. Now, the result of all of that is basically all heal effects and barrier effects and stuff and boon splash effects. They're all, they're like incidental feeling. They're splash effects. So while I think ArenaNet had a good idea back then, and I have a video, one of my earliest videos that ever got big on all of YouTube is like a terrible video that's ill thought out and ill argued, but a video in which I'm talking about this whack-a-mole thing with healing and how Guild Wars 2 was going to change the dynamics of healing. And while I think they had a good idea with all of that, the reality is, when you're not specifically choosing to heal specific targets, I think like that altruistic, hey, thanks man, kind of feeling of that whole side of the game gets lost. Like, I actually prefer healing in these more classic hotkey-based MMOs, where it's like I made a very active, very specific decision to do this thing to this individual. That feels better than most of the kind of incidental, wishy-washy feeling that Guild Wars generally has. There have been a few places in the game where you can tell it's not incidental. Like, one of my favorite things to play in PvP for a long time has been Engineer. I loved Hollow in PvP throughout the POF era, just because you could run over to someone, cleanse them with a heal turret, blast a few times. You felt that, like, connecting. You felt like it was a specific thing. But it's rare to have that in Guild Wars, and it's especially rare to have it in PvE. Here comes the Spectre. The Spectre is going back to the drawing board, and it's doing direct healing, as in you can click a target and then you will tether the ability to that target. I'm really curious to see where this goes, because I think it will feel more like that kind of white mage, Guild Wars 1 monk, like I'm an actual support feeling thing than anywhere else we had in the game. And it's so bizarre to me that Thief is the profession that might realize this vision and this playstyle better than anyone else as of the launch of End of Dragons. So, the downside here is this could end up really clunky. There is a target bind in game already for, like, target next ally. I've never used it. I didn't even know it was there. Has anyone in the comments here ever used that bind? I mean, there's been no reason up till now. But there it is. So maybe they'll expand some keybind options for people. Maybe it will feel just weird and they'll turn their back on this. But I really am happy that they're going for this experiment. And so, for example, you know, there's like a button you can press that will give a ton of quickness to a specific guy in a laser beam. And anyone caught in the middle also gets a ton of quickness. So maybe you can line up to get a lot. We'll see how that ends up going. So either this will feel clunky, I acknowledge that, or it will feel great. The beta will reveal all. The other upside here is if it feels great, I'm convinced we'll see it come elsewhere in the game. Just like how POF added barrier and it was a Scourge thing. And then they were like, well, barrier kind of works on these scrapper lines. And barrier kind of works on these Warhorn warrior abilities. And it ended up everywhere. I think you'll find the same thing. So what that could mean is like that early water stuff, like the Trident ability or Starfort attacks, those could become direct targeted. You know, if you're a water attunement Ellie trying to heal people around it, you kind of like splash at your feet. Well, now you can splash specifically target at people. I'm sure they'll do stuff like that. Druid on the staff and some CA interactions. The Engineer with its med kit, I can imagine the auto attack. When I talked about this on the stream a few days ago, someone mentioned a brilliant idea, and that's Guardian. Guardian has received the light, that amazing heal skill, but you kind of just throw it in a cone in front of you. That I could imagine getting this treatment. So this could push like the support side of Guild Wars into a really fun place, perfectly in time for a whole new wave of 10-man endgame stuff too, if the strikes end up going somewhere. So, fingers crossed, it could be very, very good. And in the beta, I'm definitely going to try that. One of the things I'm excited about with Spectre, first of all, is that there's real buildcraft here. I can imagine playing a backline supporty version, and I can imagine playing some more offensive variants. So, let's run into its other mechanics, which also look really cool. Like I say, this is my favorite. We have Shroud. So, it looks just like Necro Shroud. Sorry, it's not Life Force, it's Shadow Force now, but it's kind of the same thing. So, it's an extra health bar for you. It's defense and sustain while you're in there, as it will sponge instead, which is going to mean you're a much different feeling thief. You might say, oh, I'm a more stationary slow thief in exchange for that. But no, this thing's filled with shadow steps. Every single one of its utility skills is a shadow step. And it has mobility in its Shroud as well. Not only that, but its Shroud abilities don't use initiative. So you kind of have less initiative as a trade-off on this elite spec, but all the stuff in Shroud doesn't use it. It's regular cooldowns. So it's going to be a very simple experience, guys. I usually struggle with initiative on Thief, I really do. And now it's going to be a nice simple experience of, okay, I'm out of initiative, go into Shroud. Use those abilities, leave Shroud, and my initiative's back because it's been recharging in the meantime. And I think that will feel very, very natural and easy for people. Maybe too easy, maybe people won't like that, but I'm quite excited about that. And then the Shroud itself gives you like a barrier tether to an ally and 5 abilities, all of which look really fun. The skill 3 in the Necro Shrouds has Fear, right? Well, I guess except Harbinger, the new set, or does Harbinger have Fear there? What do we get here? Fear again, so that's Fear on Thief, which, yes, technically is a condi they had access to with, like, the Skull Fear, and in PvP, that was fairly common to get that, to be fair. But for PvE, having Fear on Thief is actually kind of tricky. You don't get it very much, and now it's very available. What else didn't they have? Speaking of new tools, Stability. So technically, in previous balances, while you were in Daggerstorm, you kind of had Stab, but not now, and you couldn't tie that Stability with other animations, but here this new Shroud will give you Stab on a Thief that has all of this mobility and TPing all over the place. So I can't wait to play with all of this stuff. One thing I'm a little bit sad about, I guess, is the Steel mechanic. Steel doesn't really do anything great or fun on this spec. It just gives you Shadow Force. That's it. I mean, basically, I think he's got like some slow application on there and so on. But I'm still kind of waiting for a Thief spec that goes really heavy on the actual idea of stealing. We saw they did something a bit weird with the Deadeye. I don't know, maybe they'll look at that at some other time. In terms of support tools, it looks really loaded. It's a heal support that also has alacrity uptime on wells, similar to Chrono, except what Chrono had to like give you alacrity on the last tick of its wells, didn't it? This thing, it's the first tick, so it's much more usable. It has quickness, and even if its specific quickness interactions aren't that great, you are a thief, you've got some core quickness opportunities for solo in the open world. You do now have wells, so you can use Chrono runes for more quickness there. The elite is like a bit like Gravity Well. Again, it's just massive CC spamming, except with Chrono, there was only a pull on the last tick, right? You got pulled once. This thing, it pulls constantly. Oh, and there's a shadow step at the start of it, because why wouldn't there be? There's another fun interaction that's going on in this spec, which is that stuff applies like a list of boons or a list of condis, but instead of applying them all, it checks if the boon or condi already exists, and if it does, it will add the next unique one. which is kind of a fun thing to see them. That's kind of something new. You might find Necromancer gets that on Plague Lands at some point. They might cross-pollinate that elsewhere across the game. And aside from that, it's just a cool, edgy theme that I'm generally excited about. I like the idea of being a caster-feeling thief. It looks simple to execute, where I struggled a lot with Deadeye. It looks more sturdy, where I struggled a lot with Daredevil. I can really imagine my first End of Dragons playthrough on it. All the trait names are cool. It's like dark and grim. It's totally up my alley. So yeah, that's the Spectre and everything I kind of loved about that. We'll see. Maybe my opinion will flip here. Remember, a lot of the stuff that looked super OP on, say, the Willbender actually turned out not to be in the end. And a lot of the stuff that looked really fun and simple on the Bladesworn, I actually kind of struggled with on Beta 2. So that's it. Thanks for listening to my first impressions, about 10 minutes on each of the 3 specs. I'm still really keen on other things I've probably missed. So please, down in the comments, I'm watching very closely to see what you guys have to say. And also, keep an eye on Twitch because, like I say, today is the beta. I'm recording this right here early in the morning. It's 9 a.m. But later on the day, that's going to be there. I will be live with it. So keep an eye out. Click the link in the description. Have it up on an open tab if you like, just so that you'll know when I'm live. Or you can click follow, get a little notification. I'll probably tweet about it when it goes on as well. And we'll go for a good many hours. Each day of the beta, I'll probably dedicate a lot of time to it. So it should be fun. And I know that website isn't everyone's cup of tea. I'm only just now starting to really try and make it watchable and do good content there. So believe me, I'm trying to make it as fun as the YouTube stuff, so do give it a shot. And in the very worst instance, I'll at least be summing up how the beta went over here on YouTube. So thanks guys, take it easy now, and I will see you for the next one very soon. Have fun now.